Welcome to No Clip, the podcast that's like a book club for people who don't think that books reward them enough for being good at them. I'm Chad Rutherman.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about Loretta, a game that was developed by Yakov Butasov, help me, published by Danjin Entertainment, and released in 2023 on Windows, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and Series S, and the Nintendo Switch.
But first, if you can give us a like or a rating, it would be greatly appreciated.
Man, okay, so there's a lot of things to get out of the way first. First things first, welcome back to all of the games named for women whose names start with the letter L theme heads out there who have been waiting for this drop for 2 months at this point.
All one of you.
Yeah, or have been dying for this possible redemption. We do finish the theme here today. But the other thing to mention is that this is a point-and-click adventure game, very much in presentation and control, not so much in terms of typical genre conventions, I think is how I would describe it.
Yeah, it's a narrative game. I guess you could say that the game's got a little bit of pixel hunting, but not really. There was a moment where I was on a screen for like 30 seconds looking for a stain on the ground that I didn't see. Mm-hmm. And that would have been about the extent of not being able to find interactable objects. Right. They do oftentimes glow when you can click on them.
And that in conjunction with sort of the tone and our protagonist a little bit, it gives me... The closest comparison, I think, is to the Cat Lady and Harvester games, which we also did for this exact theme in Lorelei earlier this year.
Yeah, it also made me think of Home.
Yeah,
for all the real fans. I think that was episode 2 or 3.
Well, it was episode 2 of Pocket.
Yeah, our old series, No Clip Pocket.
I did also kind of get that. We should talk about that like later on, I think. But there was a particular comparison I made to Home while playing this game that was a bit unfortunate in my eyes. But we'll jump back to it because it relates to the endings. So yeah, I think. It does bear a resemblance to these 2D side-scrolling adventure games, but there's very little in terms of puzzles to solve. It is like you said, it is a narrative game. It is a point-and-click adventure in the same way that a Telltale game would be considered one, in that most of it is player choice leading to different outcomes. And all of this is set over this sort of dour backdrop. I can't in good conscience call it a murder mystery because there's only one person murdering and it's you. So it is an interesting setting, I think, both in terms of like where it is set, when it is set, and also just the contents of the story.
Yeah. It's a murder mystery where you're playing as the murderer, basically. But yeah, I guess that kind of leads me into my first thing is like the game. I think like I got so swept up in my own choices that I kind of forgot. I was making like assumptions, and I was like, I wonder if there's like a version of this where you don't kill the guy at the beginning, because that's what I did. Like I went in, I interacted with the rat poison, try it, and it was, and he shot me, and it was like, oh man, got the achievement for trying to poison the detective or whatever, whoever he was, the cop. And then I had to start it over, and then got to the point where we went out by the well and she hits him with the shovel. I was like, I just assumed that's just how that scene played out. And I was like, I bet that can play out way differently. And I wonder if you even have to kill him.
That's a good question. I think that you do. Um, I have, I think, so the game doesn't function, narratively speaking, if your character does not kill their husband. Because
Right.
otherwise, it would be a game about somebody who's in an unhappy marriage, which is less exciting to sell to people than a woman who kills people in, an act of retribution.
Right.
And so that death has to occur. For me, I played entirely non-violently, to whatever point the game allows, and it did force me to kill the detective.
Okay.
As well. So if there is a path that doesn't make you do that, it's not one that I found.
Right.
Or am aware of. But I do think the game does a very good job of sort of greasing that wheel pretty early by just up front telling you, like, this happened a week after I killed my husband.
Right.
So you know that is an inevitability. You cannot skirt that. And so the player is given sort of the choice of how to do it, I believe. But otherwise, you are free to make decisions after that may or may not lead you to killing more people. And there's like a central conflict that I had that we could talk about in a second. But I at least was like prepared for the first death.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it is. That goes a long way, because like I think I like considered killing everyone, because I think the game up front is like, like already like just tells you that the Loretta is a murderer from the word go. So yeah, I do think that colors like your decision making in an interesting way, and I think I also played as non-violently as possible, but I don't remember. I might have killed one other guy.
I did a little reconnaissance before the podcast, and you got the same ending as me, at least. So if you did, it didn't matter too much.
I did kill the guy that showed up from the cigar club, I think, and like he went out. Like at least in my playthrough, a guy showed up, and he wanted the box, I think, from the lockbox in the bus station. And then I told him to go out to the barn, and then I killed him with the sickle out there. Because he seemed like he was going to murder me.
Okay, yeah, oh no, for sure. Because in my game, he showed up and he like chains you to the stove.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you can... I realized only after I picked up the sickle, there's like there's a feature of this game that I don't necessarily love, which is violent or non-violent options are highlighted in different colors. So there's like white options, yellow options, red options, I believe. And it didn't occur to me to like think about it too much because I had been directly attacked to pick up the sickle as a means of defending myself. But it was like marked as a red option to pick up the sickle, which made me think I might have to kill the guy. But the guy didn't die in my playthrough. Like I let him live after, but I did attack him with the sickle and he was bleeding.
Right.
But yeah, so I think in the end, I think that we sort of chose the same thing, which I guess ties into what I think is like my main, not a complaint, just a curiosity about this game, which is the game sets you up as being a murderer. But in my experience in this situation, most people would probably still choose to not just wantonly murder everyone.
Right.
Like, I don't think that the game set it up as like a gleeful killing simulator game, like something like Manhunt is, where there's like, you're given no choice.
Yeah, I think the angle, and it kind of worked on me in this way, but obviously not enough. Is I think it kind of like puts you in her shoes, and I think it wants you to stress about getting caught. Mm-hmm. Like, if I let the sheriff leave, he's gonna find me out, or if like I let this person live, he's gonna like find X, Y, and Z thing, like it's like I think it wants you to be paranoid about the loose ends. and then maybe decide to kill people because of that.
Right. But the irony of that is that at the end of the non-violent playthrough, the only person who knows that you killed your husband is Margaret.
Right.
So it's weird in that way, or at least in the way that I played it. That's how it turned out. Because I do think it would have been more interesting. To me, the choice was never difficult to not kill a person. And I feel like the thing that makes the game, because the game, to me, doesn't have that much to say outside of its, like, I think that if it made it a more interesting choice to push you toward murdering, that seems like it would be, and like give real consequences to people who don't murder. And of course, real consequences to people who do murder. It should go both ways in that respect. But to me, it ended up being like, because the version of the story that we saw is honestly not that interesting.
Yeah.
Which I think poses a bit of a problem, especially to my sort of like first time playthrough relationship of this game.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like a tale as old as time when it comes to like morality systems. Like, we went for like a kind of middle ground gray playthrough where like our character is a murderer, but we tried to not murder after that. And yeah, like, I feel like trying to like middle ground it usually ends up with the most boring option, even though I feel like it's probably the most like normal thing for the average person to do. Yeah, like the extreme ends of the spectrum usually have more interesting outcomes.
But notably, there isn't like an extreme. There isn't the Mass Effect Paragon playthrough of this game. Like, at no point do you like. No, you like can't not kill your husband, right? Like, there isn't a situation where you can be a model citizen. You have to commit a murder and then spend a lot of time suffering because of it, which is in itself an interesting premise, but the game doesn't do a whole lot with that. It's more interested in being like, what lengths do you go to not get caught for the first murder? Violence begets violence, Macbeth, all that shit. So that's kind of like where that's why I think the game has a stumbling block, and I think it's one that a lot of people will probably hit.
Yeah.
In a rare difference for me, I did look up a review of this, trying to find information about the endings. And reading the review was so funny to me because it felt like it was being written by an alien. Like, this guy was like, Loretta's a fun game where you get to express all of your murderous urges. And I loved grinding up human body into meat paste. And I'm just like, who the fuck are you? I don't actually know if you can grind humans into meat paste in the game, but it was funny because like that guy's review was very positive and had a lot to do with the fact that on his first playthrough he just killed everyone without even really considering the alternative. Yeah.
That's funny. I usually look up reviews just to like help me digest my own opinions, and the only ones I found were like by people who like really like narrative games. So they were all positive in that sense. I didn't find any reviews by fans of murder.
Yeah, that's it was an interesting experience for sure. Yeah. Maybe because I searched endings, that guy had peppered in some tags like life's ending, etc.
Take out everyone, first of all.
But yeah, and I also feel like fans of narrative games are the type of pretentious hoity-toity assholes like ourselves who are going to not kill anyone. So the story obviously worked for some people, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of like, that leads into something that I did really like about the game. And I think in my view is like maybe its strongest element, and that is just tone. The game has like, I have to say this lightly because otherwise, like, I feel like it bats against the other ideas that I have. But like, it's a game that doesn't actually take itself that seriously, given its like very morbid subject matter. There's a lot of like jokes, sort of, or like sarcasm, black humor, I suppose, throughout the game, but still while dealing with this very dour, downtrodden sort of like, as you find the seedy history of your husband and his compatriots. There's a less stupid word to say there. And, you know, the affair that he's having and the crimes of his past, and then like the people around town and how they're involved in things. It has like there's probably a popular television show or something I could reference here. Like maybe like a Breaking Bad where everybody is sort of implicated.
Right.
In the crimes that are happening. And I think it evokes that very well without being so overly serious or overly campy that it's like, well, obviously you're supposed to murder everyone. The character you're playing as is a clown carrying a meat cleaver. It's like, no, you're a regular person, and that's the goal.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna reference Twin Peaks there.
I thought about it.
Yeah. No, I think the game like walks that line with the tone really well. And has I would say dark sense of humor in places, like for a little bit of levity, you know, like it is kind of hard to describe, but like I do think it walks that tightrope pretty well. And yeah, one of the first thoughts I had when booting up the game is like, this is really reminiscent of that Andrew Wyeth painting of like the woman laying down in the field, like looking off at the house, like up the hill. If you don't know it off the top of your head.
One of my favorites, obviously.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like one of the most like famous like American paintings. You would know it if you saw it. Okay. And then they have it on the wall in the house. It's like just a pixel art mush. But it's definitely supposed to be that painting on the wall. I was like, oh, okay, I called that. But yeah, it has that like Americana vibe to it. Which made me think of Twin Peaks and things like Breaking Bad. In like that kind of like snowballing like venturing into like the criminal world.
right. Yeah, and I think that's that ended up being a better metaphor than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, and I liked that a lot about it. I found this to be, while not always like gripping, the game's only 2.5 hours long, so it's not like I was bored of it really by the end of it. It was more just like, for the most part, it compelled me to continue playing. I played it in a single sitting, as I think most people will, who sit down to actually finish the game. And it kept up the pace, and I think it changed tone at a gentle enough pace and frequently enough that it never became too focused on a single thing. And so I think that helps a lot. And I liked the chapter dividing is sort of centered around objects, like these things that she is like specifically focused on at a point in time. Helped sort of like steer the player. You never get lost or confused. You can follow the story pretty well, and it's not going to be like a horrible, like I have to create a web of events to understand what's going on situation. It feels like you're watching like a pretty accessible like television show or something.
Yeah. It's all about the narrative in that way. Like there are like these little like abstract little puzzles in between the chapters that aren't hard to do for the most part. And
we'll talk about it.
Yeah. It's like, it's not concerned about like being like challenging and like impeding your progress. Like that's not part of it.
Yeah. And that's, I think, good for the type of game that this is. To spare a word for the in between chapter mini games. I would argue, and I don't know if I'm going to receive much pushback for this, probably the most misguided inclusion of the game. They feel very pointless and are very unpolished. Some of them, whatever, I don't care. But then you have ones that are like, defend the symbol in the middle, from the word scotch, which will appear 2 inches away from it and immediately run into it, and then you have to retry the game 3 times.
No, I agree. Like the ones like that are a little like buggy, or not buggy, but like not polished. Probably could have done without those, but like I liked those sections as like little palate cleansers. Like I kind of liked what they added to like the pacing of the game personally.
I can kind of see that, like where other games might use like a title card or something, because the game doesn't have much action going on, it flips that around and has like little bursts of it. I just wish there was like more to it.
And like I like there's like little bits of symbolism in there. Like there's one where you're like defending an egg, and there's like the whole thing about how like she like lost a pregnancy, and I'm like, oh, like I see how like there's like they're doing something here like subtle. And there's like I think they tied like the Rorschach tests into at least one of them, and like they could have leaned into that a bit more, I think.
Yeah, my favorite interstitial by far was the one where they just have you do a Rorschach test. Because it's just interesting to see sort of that applied here, like in this space, because it's said as if from the perspective of somebody talking, like a psychoanalyst talking to Loretta. But because they give you the player the option, it's like you can sort of influence that or try and take it seriously. So it was a fun little side exercise. Also, I don't know why I like the one that was a jigsaw puzzle. Right. I'll do a jigsaw puzzle. I don't hate that. That's great. I just don't like the ones that felt like that were bad.
Yeah.
This breaking news. I liked the ones that were good and didn't like the ones that were bad. Story at 11. But that's all I have to say about this. They weren't a big detriment. I would not be like, don't play that game. It's got that thing where you have to click the word scotch.
Right. Yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up was just like the scale or scope of the game. There aren't very many locations, and I feel like the game did a really good job of like not feeling small or like it was hurting for different locations. Like I thought it would have been interesting to have like more spots in the town to go to or something. But like for what it was, like I think it made really good use like of the house. Like I wasn't like ever like, I don't know, like oh man, like something like Sally Face. Where I was like, okay, like we've been walking around this apartment building forever. Like I'd like a different change of scenery. This game didn't have that problem for me, probably because it's so short. That's just something that I thought about, like the fact that I feel like it was like they used their allotted like their game real estate well.
Yeah, it's good because there's always a sense of like dread to the house in some degree. Like that's where your husband's buried. The sort of like wallpaper and shit deteriorates over the course of the game as you like aren't participating in the actual upkeep of the house. And so you have to, so coming back to it over and over again, it feels still like relevant and fresh in certain places. And yeah, because of the scope, like you said, it's not like you're in the house for that long in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, you take little trips out to other things, including like weird. This is such a classic. I was surprised when I saw this game came out in 2023, even though I knew that it was a more recent game. I think the moment I saw like the map with the car and you like click on the pins and you drive to the locations, I was like, this feels like LucasArts in the 90s, which I assume it's at least intentional to like cast that overall idea out there, but I don't know if it was specifically intentional to call back to those, but I got that feeling from a lot of it. I think those are also games that usually dealt with obviously higher budget, so they had more locations, but they able to use locations in a similarly effective way. So yeah.
Yeah. The abstracting travel does feel like a very point and click kind of thing. But it could also make me think of like Kentucky Route Zero. Like the first chapter of that where you like drive the little wheel around the map and stuff.
What a good game that was. Just like that game a lot. Just shout out Kentucky Route Zero. I think about that game a lot. Another element of the game that I do like is I like its visual style. Because it is, but I like it in a way. If I saw just a screenshot of this game, I would not be like hyper impressed by it, I don't think. But I like that in the context of the game that the visuals look kind of stiff and like all of the characters are faceless when you aren't in close up. It feels really appropriate for the sort of like detached protagonist and the atmosphere of the game.
Yeah. And one thing like I forgot about, but weirdly like every review said something about, because I guess it fills word count, is like it opens up and it's like play in color mode or play in noir mode. And it's like it recommends color mode for your first playthrough. So that's what I did. But like, yeah, I think like it having a noir mode feels like it fits like kind of like it in the way that like you're describing. Like it does kind of almost feel like the characters are stiff. Like you think like the stiff detective, like with the smoking the cigarettes, like and
or a stiff like a dead body.
Yeah, or a stiff drink, etc., etc.
Stiff drink,
and then the aspect ratio is like widescreen. Like it does feel very like much like an older movie in certain ways. And yeah, and I think the people having no faces works. There's like a detached or almost like a lonely kind of feeling that gives you, and that feels intentional. Kind of like the to reference another painting, Nighthawks, another one of the most famous American paintings.
That one I know.
That one is like has this. It's supposed to like feel uncanny. Like the thing everyone says about it is like the building doesn't have a door. You know, and like it's just like this kind of like almost like a to almost feel like a liminal space or something. And this game's definitely like getting at that same sort of feeling, I think.
Yeah, I think that is a good point of reference for that sort of uncanniness, which is not specifically how I would describe the art style, but it is sort of, that's the emotion that it evokes in a lot of ways, particularly when dealing with other characters. There's always this sort of like, I don't know. Do you remember the scene, or presumably did it occur to you? I guess it probably did, but I'm not sure. Where your like old neighbor man comes over and complains to you about poisoning his crops. When that guy showed up and started talking, were you just like, what the fuck is this? Like, where did this guy come from? Why have I not seen him before? Why is he so weirdly aggressive?
No,
not at all.
Yeah, I don't know if I've like seen a movie with a character like that or something, but like I immediately was like, he's like, oh, I'm your neighbor. And I'm like, oh yeah, because like out here in the middle of nowhere where everyone has a farm, he probably lives like 20 miles away.
Right.
And that's exactly what he says. And then he's like, oh, I'll run off from your farm. I don't know. It just felt like a thing, like a trope or something I'd heard before. But he was weirdly aggressive, but that didn't really stand out as weird given the time period that he would talk to a woman like that, etc.
Yeah, that is the to me that is like the one of those moments where when it happened, I was just like, this is like a thing that's happening that I now have to deal with.
Right.
And sort of to me like kept that sort of, I don't know how to say it other than uncanny, like just weirdness.
Yeah, and it's
to
also
a lot of the game.
Adding to that like stress that you're supposed to be feeling. Like you got all these things going on. It piles one more on top of you. Like
completely out of nowhere.
Yeah. Like it wants to like be like, oh fuck, now another thing I have to worry about. Like like it happens in real life sometimes. Like bad things or things that you have to deal with like compound, and you have to do like 5 things in a week, and it is exhausting and sucks.
Yeah.
But, except for with the added, you murdered a guy on top of that.
Right. You said something a second ago that was talking about how it made sense because of the fact that they lived in a farm that was, everybody's got 20 miles in between their neighbors, and talking to a woman in the time period. I think it's interesting. It's interesting in a way that I'm not going to be able to like fully elaborate on because I wasn't able to find out that much about the developer of this game. But from my understanding, from my limited single Google search I did, the developer of this game is like Russian, like a Russian person. And the choice to set this game not just in America, which would not even be remarkable in terms of comment, the fact that it's like a very specific time period in America, and also just in the middle of fucking nowhere, like in the sort of, I'm now confusing words, like Bible Belt America, like out in the farmland. It feels very, I think, one, intentional to call back to sort of the noir aesthetic that the story and everything goes for. But it, like, at this point, the 50s or the 40s, I forget when this takes place, after Prohibition, but not by that much.
Right.
So maybe the 30s even. That no longer provokes...
46 or 7, I think is what it says on the calendar.
Okay, that might be it.
I want to say, yeah, so like the mid to late 40s.
Yeah, that doesn't evoke like a sense of nostalgia in anyone anymore. Like that is purely a historical time period for 99.9% of the people who are going to be playing this game. So I just thought it's just a very interesting setting because I feel like you don't see it much at all, but especially not in video games. And for it to come from somebody who's like outside of America, I think makes it also interesting. Like there was something about this that drew him to it as a setting. And maybe it's just a love of noir films, or like, I don't know if or maybe he's like a big Norman Rockwell guy, but like those, like that's to me, like those are the connections, but I don't really know.
Yeah, I know. I would assume it has something to do with that. Yeah, like movies or different types of art. Like I mentioned that Andrew Wyeth painting. Yeah, like I think that kind of like mid-century Americana is definitely like an aesthetic. Yeah, and I just assume must have seen some movies he liked with that kind of setting or something like that.
But it definitely does count as like an interesting setting, though.
Oh,
like
yeah.
I said, I don't know that I've played. There's several games that have like noir as like their aesthetic and are ostensibly set in those time periods, but I feel like most of them use it purely aesthetically and don't take into account anything else that's going around.
Or set in a city or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but noir especially often set in cities, so that's a good call out.
Yeah.
So for this to be like, this is a thing where like, oh, they have one car, and so if somebody leaves, the other person's just stranded there. The prices of things generally being like the way they are, especially out in the boonies and stuff, things very cheap to get a hold of. And just like, there's a lot of little cultural elements of this that I felt like this guy clearly knows more about this era of time than I do based on having played this game. So I appreciated the setting a lot. I thought it was a cool departure from a lot of the stuff that we typically see.
Yeah. It sucks you into the story, I think.
Oh, yeah. I only have one other thing, and it's pretty minor. So
All right. Well, I'm fresh out of stuff, so fire away.
All right. I just wanted to mention briefly that I do not love that the game soundtrack is like purely classical music. I don't think it fits the aesthetic as well as creating something that like mimics that noir style, or even just like is more timely, like appropriate to the time period. But I also, of course, understand, given the fact that we're a podcast with two people who were formerly musicians and still could not get like a theme song worked out for like multiple years.
I mean, there's a big difference between being a musician and a composer.
True, yes. And notably, but I mean, I think there was like a brief period where like, can we make the theme song? And then like 1 second later going, no.
That is true. That's true. Yeah, I don't have like, I don't really remember the music very well, which I think speaks to your point. But I did like the sound design a lot. Like I thought this game really made really good, like an effective use of like using sound effects as the soundscape and like not having music and like having it like come in and out depending on the situation, like what like the soundscape was, like whether it was music or whether it was sound. I thought that was used to a great effect, like to make things like tense and like have like a sense of like almost like unease or unpredictability coming from that.
Yeah, it has that great thing that I wouldn't have thought about if you hadn't mentioned it, but like where there are scenes that you would expect to be quiet that will just have like a radio on, which just like makes it so uncomfortable for a second. Like that's such a good thing to evoke. So that's a good point, especially considering that some of the music is diegetic. Like you can go turn the radio off, or walk away from it or whatever to change how it sounds. So there's like usually a reason for it. But yeah, like having the radio on while your husband's dead body is on the floor is like this juxtaposition that works really well.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have one other thing that I'll just like sort of throw out as a thought experiment. You let me know if this is interesting at all. This is an interesting combination of a protagonist who is a blank slate character because your actions can influence her in like a pretty diverse way. And also the fact that the character has like a pretty strong personality built into her. And I found it cool because I felt like it worked well in the playthrough that I did, where I killed my husband and nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how it maps on necessarily, but I can imagine a world where it does work. Like, I think that they have created a character who is like just abrasive enough without being like a complete dickbag asshole to like make it work both on the level of you playing non-violently and playing like a psychopath.
Yeah, like it makes me think of like Senua's Sacrifice, like the idea that like Loretta has some kind of mental illness and like you as the player are kind of like a manifestation of that, like pushing her towards one decision or another.
Right.
But just doing it in a more subtle way here, like with Senua's Sacrifice, that's like explicitly what's happening, and sometimes she'll turn and look at you and break the fourth wall. Yeah, and I also think about things like The Witcher. Geralt's like a pretty defined personality, but you do have like the ability to kind of sway him a little bit this way and that, but with the decisions you make. But yeah, no, I think it fits really well in this kind of a narrative, where it's like about someone's mental state. So,
right.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good, like, way to like kind of marry the gameplay in the narrative.
For sure. And then I even said that I was going to come back to this, and we did not. The game does have multiple endings. I think we should give that a brief talk about. And this is something that I didn't know until today, because I went and watched the endings of the game just on YouTube. I wasn't going to replay this game just because it would take a long time to do. But similarly to Home, I think that it's missing a subtlety or a nuance in determining the endings that disappoints me a little bit. Home is a game that I actually enjoyed going back to get other endings in, because the game was very brief and your decision points were pretty obvious. But ultimately, most of the endings felt like they would fall into like two categories that had interchanging parts. And it's been long enough since I played the game that I don't remember exactly what the count was there. But this has 5 endings where it's all just like, the one that we got, she like dies and goes to heaven, which is crazy. As like that they're like literally, that is what happens, right? Like your character gets old, or doesn't get old, makes it to winter, and then dies of gangrene. And then you die, and then you go to hell, and the bouncer's like, whoa, now you're not in hell because you didn't kill all those people.
Yeah, go back to the elevator,
Yeah, hit the elevator, go to heaven, then you get reunited with your dead child. Which is unfortunate, I guess, that if you die as a baby, you just stay as a baby for all eternity in Loretta's version of the afterlife. But then the other endings are all just different flavors of like, you die unhappy.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make them particularly interesting to collect. And it makes me, as somebody who didn't get those endings, completely unsure what decisions you have to make in order to get to them.
Right, like how many I just assumed it was how many people you killed.
How many murders?
Yeah. But there has to be other things too, I would imagine.
Yeah. But I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, there's like an ending where you just get like killed in your backyard, and like an ending where you go to a psychiatric ward, and then an ending where you like spend your life running away from pursuers.
Right.
Which are all pretty bad endings, all things considered. But also have the potential to be interesting. But I don't know what the difference between killing 5 people and killing no people is in terms of how the game calculates that, or like where the other decision points are, or if they only show up if you kill people. How much of this game did I not see? This is like, to me, like a textbook case of like a game with multiple endings that I understand the need for, but will never get. It did not compel me to go back, similar to like Oxenfree.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said like the cutoff points feel like kind of nebulous and weird, or like they could have used more like obvious, or not obvious, but like more like different decisions that lead to the different endings could have felt like more obvious or substantial. You know, like when you go back and watch the endings, you're like, I have no idea what I could have done to get that.
Right.
Yeah, like it makes it feel like a little bit more nebulous and like, I think, less interesting. Especially when then the endings all end up being kind of a different flavor of the same thing.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not like you look at the ending and it's like the dog is controlling everything from a mainframe in Silent Hill, right? Like, it's not like I have no idea how I would have gotten that because it is so far outside of my expectations. It's like, if I go into the murder slurry endings, how do I attain each individual one is where it becomes muddy. So it is, I don't know, it is a little bit unfortunate in that regard. But I like this game as, and maybe this is Final Thoughts territory, but I like it as you play the game one time and the ending you get reflects that playthrough. And you go, that's what Loretta was to me. So, I don't hold it against it too bad, but I do hold it against it a little bit because I couldn't get all the achievements. Do we have vomit on the floorboards thoughts?
My vomit on the floorboards thoughts are I thought this game was pretty enjoyable because I love to murder people. No. Yeah, it feels like I think like you were getting at there right at the end. Like it's a game that's relatively short. Like 2.5, 3 hours long, and you can play it in one sitting and go through an interesting narrative with an interesting setting and have like a satisfying experience. Like it's the kind of game that we would always look for when we used to get together and play games late at night. So like it feels like it would have been one of those like classics where you're like, oh, we need to find another game like Loretta. That was a slam dunk. So yeah, it felt that it filled those shoes for me really well. Yeah, no, it's not perfect. The little mini games could have cut out some of the bad ones, or or like flesh those out more if you're gonna really want to include them. Yeah, like the multiple endings, the pacing of the narrative, and all the there are little kinks here and there, but like overall, I don't think they're like that big of issues like for the experience it's trying to deliver. So I mostly just enjoyed my time with it. It's been a long time since like I played a game that I can play in one sitting, and that's something I always really like to do. Like there's just like a satisfaction that comes from that's like rare for games. So I don't know. I enjoyed my time with it.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to look at it. I think to put a more crass sort of like bottom line on it, it's like this game is like it's a fairly cheap indie game. Like it's like $10-15 in that vicinity. And I think for some people, if that probably is going to be too steep of an asking price, and for other people it's going to be like just right. And like, yeah, especially like us 10 years ago, this would have been like such a good find. And it's funny to think about that because the way that it translates between like not a group experience, but like an experience with just like two people hanging out, which is a different vibe. Three's a crowd, they say, is weird because I didn't consider it when I was playing, because when you're just focused on it alone, especially when you're doing it in the context of like, we're doing a podcast on this, I need to be looking for things to talk about and like what I think the game did well and not well. It loses a little bit of its more spontaneous charm that I think this game actually has a lot of. The character writing is really good. I think that the art style lends itself to the game. It's very competently made and has an interesting story and has like a meaningful choice system with the pitfalls that we talked about earlier in the episode. But I think altogether, though, like this isn't going to blow anybody's socks off, I don't think, but it is like a super interesting thing, especially to come out at the time that it did and to be set the way that it is, that I think it is totally worth playing. So to bring it back, I think like if you're the kind of person, and we've said this on many episodes, or at least I know I have, where it's like, if you find yourself mapping your tastes similarly to us, I think that this is a game that really sort of like hits that spot. It's short, and all of the other good things that I just said about it being well written, and a little creepy and with meaningful player choice. Like if that stuff speaks to you, I think this game is absolutely worth checking out. And I enjoyed it a good bit. I think that there is a part of me that has been absorbed by sort of the internet dumb idiot culture where I'm like, I don't want to like hype the game up too much because of how simple it is, but that simplicity is really one of its strengths, and I should be hyping it up for what it is, I think. So yeah, I also come down positively, I think, in the end. I mean, I definitely come down positively. I just have to fight back the urge to murder. Thank you for listening to No Clip this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, the pod racing game. The end. It is the pod racing game. Don't you bring up Super Bombad Racing, you fucks.
Yeah. I mean, if you're around our age, odds are, or I don't know, the N64 didn't sell the greatest, but the odds aren't terrible that you have fond memories of this.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like when we talked about the Pokemon TCG game. It's like clearly didn't sell as well as the RPGs, but like I don't know a single person who hasn't played it.
Right.
And that is similar with this. I associate Racer pretty hard with my childhood, which is why it is our December pick this year. Not because of me, actually. You're the one who suggested it, but I agree with your decision. But until that time, you can get a hold of us. All of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com or on splattershot.pro. There you can find links to our email address, our Twitter account, our YouTube channel, the Discord server where we talk about games and take suggestions of games to play. And you can listen to all of our old episodes, including episodes that we did on Lorelei, the cat lady.
Who's Lila?
Who's Lila?
Anything else
Lorelei and
for,
the Laser Eyes.
For L names month.
This would be, I know that we did a joke where we did Simeon September and April as 2 separate months. This would be an insane one to bring back. Like, could we find 4 more?
If we ever find 4 more, then we definitely will do it.
All right, so keep your eyes peeled. Remember to suggest on our Discord any time that there is a woman's name that starts with L game, and we'll add it to a list. Murder that subscribe button.
Throw that bell down a well.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that to rhyme.
And avoid talking to Margaret in the comment section.
There it is. There it is. Within those different locations, hold, you'll encounter some visual design. This is the most convoluted segue of all time. I'm just going to throw it in the trash.